Hello everyone, welcome to my series on JavaScript and jQuery, and today we're going to discuss how to parse a JSON string in JavaScript and jQuery. So let's start. So what we have here is a simple HTML form. We have two text areas and we have a button. So what's going to happen is we enter a JSON string right here in this text area, and when we click on parse JSON, it's going to parse that JSON string and list out all the objects, basically the JSON properties and the values. So let's take an example. Let's say we have a JSON string with the property name and the value John Smith, and then we have one more property, let's say age, and the value 30, and we have one more property job, and let's say the value is teacher. And when we click on parse JSON, it's parsing the JSON string and listing out the different properties along with their values. Now in case there is a property which is an array, let's say this property is an array, and it is an array of JSON strings or JSON objects. Let's say the first is first name, the value is John, and the next JSON object is last name Smith. So in case we have a structure like this where one of the properties is itself an array of JSON objects, in that case, when we click on parse JSON, each of the elements of the individual JSON objects in the array is going to be listed out with the respective values. So first name John, last name Smith, age 30, and teacher. So this is what we are going to create. Now let's go back to our code, and what we're going to do is we're deleting this entire code from here, and then we're going to recreate this. So all we have now is a text area, a button, and we have one more text area to display all the objects. Okay, so let's start. So we have already assigned a function over here on the onClick attribute of the button. The function name is parse JSON string. So let's start by creating that function. So we have a function called parse JSON string, and we start by reading the string from the first text area. So our text area is this, and the ID is txt.json. So we start by document.get element by ID txt.json dot value. Now we parse this JSON string and store that in a object, and we use json.parse function to parse the string which is stored in str. Now once we have parsed the string, we need to read the key values, and we also need to read the values stored in those keys. To do that, we use a for loop, and we say variable key in obj, and let's just try to pop up the keys just to see if it's working fine or not. Save it, and let me just copy this and refresh the page, paste it. Let's just go back to the simpler one. We'll come to that later on. So we had John Smith, and we parse it, and the different keys are name, age, and job. Those are the three properties of this JSON string. Okay, so let's go back to our code. This is working fine. Now for each key, what do we do? So we have a, let's say, string variable str. Let's call it output str equal to blank. Now we're going to append the keys one by one in the output str. So output str equal to output str plus, and we're going to put the key name. So let's just do a string conversion of the key, and plus, we're going to put an equal sign, plus, and then we're going to put the value of the key. Now when we use a JSON object and we are trying to bring out the value of that particular property which is defined in this variable, the syntax is obj square brackets, and we put the key over here, right? And then we end it by a new line character. so that each property comes in a different line. And then at the end we do document. Let's just copy this, bring it over here, equal to output str, and this id should be of the second text area, which is txt object list. Now let's just copy the string and refresh this page and paste the string again, parse the JSON, and you can see all the properties name, age and job are clearly listed out in the second text area. Now we're going to do the second part of our problem, which is we're going to turn this first property into an array, and this array would have two JSON objects. One JSON object would have key as first name and the value as John, and the second JSON object would have key as last name and the value of course is Smith. And now we're going to try to parse it. So let's see how that works. To do that, in the for loop we have to first identify an array. So we're going to put if condition, and we're going to check if our value obj square bracket key is an array. So to check if a particular variable is an array, the function that we used is array.isArray. This is the function that will return true if this value is an array. So obviously for the first value this will return true. Now what if this returns true? So if it returns false, then we go to else and we follow whatever we did earlier. But if it returns true, then we need to loop through the array. So once again we use a for loop, variable index in, and we put obj square brackets key. So we loop through the different indexes of that array value. Now for each index, what do we do? So we need to remember that each index or each value of that array is in itself a JSON object. So once again we need to loop through the keys in that JSON object. So variable, let's say we call this variable key2 in obj square bracket key, that's our original JSON value, and then we include our index over here, that becomes our JSON object, and then we're looping through the keys in that object. And once again we copy this statement and we paste it here. In this case we use key2, and here we use key index and then square bracket key2. Save it, and now let's go back and copy the string and refresh the page, paste the string again, parse it, and now we can see each attribute of the individual JSON object has been listed out along with our earlier objects. So this is how you can parse a JSON string, list out the key values, whether they are JSON properties or they are an array of JSON objects in itself, using a for each loop. Now let's try the same thing using jQuery. So let's start by deleting our JavaScript code. And let's just delete the language attribute over here and prepare the jQuery construct. So we have $document.ready, and we have our parent function over here. Bring it down. So define our function, parse JSON string, or actually we don't need to do that. We can just remove this on click from here, and we can put an ID value for the button, btn, let's say JSON parse, and here we can use the pound symbol with the ID value and go for a dot click. and define the function right here. So the moment the button is clicked, the first thing that we do is str equal to dollar. Once again use the hash key and use this text area ID dot value and get that into this variable. Now the second thing we have to do is to parse it. Once again we declare an object and we do a dollar dot parse JSON and we parse the string to an object. The next step would be to loop through the object that we created. So we go for a jQuery $each loop and we place the object over here, and we have our function which has the parameters key and value. And now we can easily iterate through the keys and values. Let's just try to alert the key and the value just to see if it is working fine, and go back to our page, refresh the page of course, and put a JSON string over here. Let's say name. Once again we go with, let's say, John Smith, and let's put one more property, age, and keep it 30, and click on parse. Okay, there is some error. Let's look at the error. So we go for console and it says unexpected token, so there is a extra parenthesis. Let's go back and check that. Line number is 21. So okay, we don't need this. Save it, copy the JSON string again, refresh the file, paste it, and it says name John Smith, age 30. So it's working perfectly fine. And now we can easily we need to create a output str equal to this. Now we can easily just append the string with the key value pair. So this equal to output str plus we have our key, we have the equal sign, and we have the value, followed by a new line character. And once this is done, we come out of the for each loop and we assign, once again we use the pound sign for the ID of the second text area, and we use the dot val function to assign the output str to the second text area. Let's see how it works. Copied the JSON string, refresh the page, paste it, and same as before, we get our name and we get our age properties and values. So this is how you can parse a JSON string using JavaScript and jQuery. Just try it out on your own, and let me know in the comment section if you face any issues. I'll be happy to help you out or post a video for you. Thank you.